Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if China and Taiwan switched places. What do I mean by switching places? Well, I want to basically say that the Kuomintang would rule over mainland China while the Communist Party would escape to Taiwan. As we all know, China had always a very hectic and troublesome history. China was plagued by instability and threats from the outside. Today's China is one of the most stable China we have seen since centuries, probably. China, the way it exists and stands today, is in some way exceptional because usually it was very divided, not by national borders, but among different factions most of the time. You had different rulers, different kings, different generals, and different warlords. The Chinese identity was never questioned by these factions, and warlords or different kingdoms that emerged, and whenever outsiders came and invaded China, they could never impose their customs. Instead, what we saw was, interestingly enough, a Sinicization. So people who invaded from the outside, they became Sinicized. And we know that usually it was the thing that happened, especially when, for instance, Kublai Khan was ruling over China. Although he had Mongol origins, well, he became Chinese. The same for the Manchu people, who then ruled over the Chinese. These periods of stability, destabilization, foreign intervention, and whatnot, they were very common. But China today is not just stable, but there are officially, or well, unofficially, two Chinas. One China exists on the mainland and the other on the island of Taiwan. One China is controlled by the Communist Party, although it would be a very far stretch to say that they are truly communist. While the other China is, let's face it, the remnant of the Kuomintang, even though the Kuomintang is not really having any power nowadays. So let's imagine a scenario where both Chinas switched places. What if all of that changed? What if China and Taiwan switched places? Let's say that the Communist Party in China would have a different route they would use during the Great March. Or we could simply say that during World War II, many Chinese communists or nationalists, they were put under different circumstances, and more of them would end up in the south. Or we could also say that the nationalist forces would have almost totally beaten the communists in the 40s, and the communists would, under Mao, make another great march to the south and lose the battles and thus the war and escape to Taiwan. For Mao, this will be a huge loss. Mao had a huge ego, and Mao's personality was a reason why there was a senior Soviet split in the first place. But without the communists controlling mainland China, Taiwan would become somewhat of an Asian Cuba for the Soviets. They would not have Taiwan as a puppet immediately, but the Soviets would make use of Taiwan in several ways, like using their Pacific Fleet in there to station it, and whatnot. As for North Korea, we could say that probably not attack the South. I doubt it, quite honestly, that they would even attempt in doing so. And this would also butterfly away the Vietnam War. In fact, the Soviets will have a bigger influence over the policies in Korea, Taiwan, and Vietnam. I don't think that any of these leaders would go crazy and make a kamikaze action, because it would be unwanted and not supported by the Soviets. And before anyone would attempt something such crazy as a kamikaze attack on another country that was controlled by the US, the Soviets would probably depose that leader and exchange that leader for someone that was more seen as fit by Moscow. This means that the Soviet bloc would come much closer. Mongolia could even become a member of the Warsaw Pact, and so would Korea, Taiwan, and even perhaps North Vietnam. The Soviets would of course fear the US and their influence, and without Mao in the picture, the communist world would have no alternatives which they could rely on. What about mainland China? Well, first of all, mainland China after the civil war will put pressure onto Tibet and East Turkestan. These regions would be taken by the Kuomintang in an uncontested way. The West would also face a little dilemma with the Kuomintang. This nationalist China would officially side with the West, but they would sometimes play the West out against the East. Chiang Kai-shek would be able to get Macau and Hong Kong even earlier than in OTL, even perhaps threatening the West with consequences. In general, however, he would respect the alliance with the West, as he would be faced with the Soviet Union, North Korea, Taiwan, and North Vietnam. And for the West, it would be beneficial of having someone like Chiang Kai-shek in charge, instead of Mao, for instance. Internally, Taiwan under the Communist Party, of course, would fare worse than in OTL. Would there be a cultural revolution? Would the policies of the Communist Party be adapted? And would we see red instead of a white terror in Taiwan? These are questions that can't be answered, but if I would have to take a guess, then yes, many people will die under the communists, and there will be very specific changes, such as land reforms, nationalization, and so on. However, the problem Taiwan will face is that it doesn't have enough resources, and with that said, Taiwan may become similar to North Korea, and even fare worse than North Korea. It would totally rely on the Soviet Union, trade with the socialist brother states, and it would have no chance in coming anywhere close to OTL's Taiwan. Mainland China would have better years in the beginning compared to the communist China, but I think that the mainland China ruled by the Kuomintang would not necessarily be economically as strong than OTL's communist China. First of all, there will be a bigger population, and I don't think there will be a one-child policy. Obviously, it will have a positive effect for the Chinese society later on, as there will be less single men, but overall, wealth would be more divided, while at the same time stay also more concentrated and focused in some families, for instance. Some areas may even never really see a connection with the rest of China and just stay very underdeveloped, as compared to bigger cities on the coast, for instance. If a China ruled by the Kuomintang stays stable, they will seek to make similar initiatives as China does nowadays, but with different policies and a different population and rule of law, things may look very different in an alternate timeline of 2022. Moreover, in this alternate timeline, religions will play a bigger role. Especially Islam in China would have a more important role because of the good personal relationships that Chiang Kai-shek had with the Muslim generals. The Uyghur minority could be treated in a better way, but the Tibetans could still face a lot of trouble. However, I don't think that Dalai Lama will suddenly escape from Tibet. Now, would the Kuomintang try to get Taiwan? Yes and no. The Kuomintang could try to invade Taiwan in case it would choose to go a more independent way. However, if the rulers of Taiwan would, as I said before, join the Warsaw Pact or make an official alliance with the Soviets or get some word of the Soviets where they would promise them a protection, such an invasion would be off the tables. We may even see the construction of Soviet bases in there in response to the US bases in Japan and South Korea. US bases in China would not happen because I don't think that someone like Chiang Kai-shek would let this ever happen. Relations with India and Pakistan would be also interesting to analyze. In this alternate timeline, India may be closer to the Soviet Union, while Pakistan could be an ally to the Kuomintang and thus be much closer to the West. India won't become now a communist state, but in this alternate timeline, India will definitely be on the side of the Warsaw Pact. With the fall of the Soviet Union, Taiwan would face an identical crisis as Cuba or North Korea, but I don't think that Taiwan would collapse immediately. Instead, they could liberalize their economy, and we may see a similar evolution as in OTL's Vietnam, for instance. North and South Vietnam could peacefully unite in this timeline, while the two Koreas would remain split, unless Kim Il-sung would have been butterflied away, then yes, maybe the two Koreas could also be united. Overall, the world would be different, and mainland China as well as Taiwan would be very different places. Switching the two ruling parties wouldn't do any good to both sides, and I believe that both regions would actually be much weaker to their OTL counterparts. Reunification would also in this timeline be out of question. And that's where we leave it for now.
That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.